Welcome to this quick demonstration of Oracle API Gateway. I'm David Loon, Senior Architect with Qubit Consulting, and in this demonstration I'll show a simple configuration that illustrates how API Gateway can secure and monitor a web application and use a Java plugin to perform Geo-IP filtering of SOAP service requests. First, let me quickly describe the Oracle API Gateway product itself. So API Gateway typically lives in the DMZ of a network. It provides a kind of Swiss Army knife, if you like, of tools for monitoring and securing your applications and services. Things like it provides a web interface, real-time and historical monitoring of traffic passing through the gateway. It has a separate analytics component that can provide offline and detailed analysis of the traffic going through the gateway. It can augment the security of services. For example, it could be used to add security to a completely unsecured existing service, or could be used to add extra security to an existing secured service. It can monitor service payloads for threats, so things from simple regular expression matching for injection attacks to full-on integration with various malware scanning products. It can transform and route requests. For example, it can transform between XML and JSON, and even map some API semantics, for example, SOAP to REST. This is currently a bit of a hot topic because of the ability to present traditional SOAP services in ways suitable for consumption by mobile applications. It has a plugin API, so it can be used as a hook for hanging any piece of bespoke functionality that you need to have running in your DMZ, which is one of the things I'll be demonstrating here. For my demo, I've sort of dreamed up a fairly simple use case. We have an existing web application and a service. For the purpose of the demo, I'm just using an out-of-the-box installation of Atlassian Jira, which has a web application, but it has a SOAP service in there as well. We want to add SSL to the web application. We want to add monitoring of the web application, which is fairly easy because that comes for free with the Gateway product. And we want to apply rules to accessing the SOAP service part of the web application without affecting the rest of the web application. And specifically, we want to add a Geo-IP filter so that we can essentially whitelist which countries are allowed to access the SOAP service. The lab is just set up on a MacBook Pro with VMware to run a few of the components. The client here is just a browser running in the MacBook Pro. API Gateway I have installed on a Oracle Linux inside a virtual machine, and Jira is running in an Ubuntu server instance running in another virtual machine. I'm also using a browser to access the management application of OAG. This is my Gateway lab. It's Oracle Linux. It's got API Gateway installed. It's just a plain installation without any of the sample bits and pieces, and I've configured a simple topology to support this demo. Over here I've got a Chrome browser running on my MacBook. It's telling me about the topology. One group, one node in that group. Not doing any load balancing for the purpose of this demo. There's no configuration in the gateway, and there's nothing on port 8080 because there's no configuration there yet. Back to my Linux box. I've started Policy Studio here. What I'm going to do is, to start off with, is to create an SSL listener with a certificate that I've created, and then make a very simple policy that simply forwards traffic on to the backend Jira application. The first thing I need to do to make that happen is to import my SSL certificate, which I have sitting here. It's just a file that I've created using the command line OpenSSL utility. And ditto for the private key. Right, so that's now there imported and ready to be used. So now I can create a listener, the SSL listener that uses that key. Oops, I mistyped that. So what I need to do is add a listener on port 8080 that uses HTTPS. And uses the certificate that I just imported. Yeah, that's done. Now, next thing I need to do is associate a path with my policy, but first I need to create the policy, which I'll create a container for so we can keep them all together. This is just going to be the default policy for our Jira site, and it has two filters. One is a static router, it simply forwards to and port 8081 is the port that's sitting on over HTTP, and the second filter is a connection which makes a connection out, and we want to tell it we want the browser or the client generally to handle redirects, and also to pass on the host specified by the client in case the web application generates absolute redirects and things like that, so they can be faithfully handled by the client. And we just connect those up. And now we can associate a path, which is basically the entire site, with our policy that we just created. Okay, that's done that. You can now deploy that. So it's pushing the deployment out to the gateway, and if we go and look at the gateway, we should see some logging coming out here to say it's having something deployed to it. There it goes. Okay, done. Now, as things stand, nothing much is going to happen because we haven't opened the firewall port. So we can do that now. The only port that's open there is 8090, which is the management port. Okay, now when we go back to our browser, let's make sure the management's got the new configuration. Now, this tells us that we've got listening on port 80, and we've got a policy that just covers the whole site. We can change some of the logging and things here. The main thing we want to do is see that it works, which if we access this now, we should be able to see the whole site. And there it is. Now, when we go back to the management, we see it's doing some real-time logging of the messages. So right here, out of the box, apart from having the SSL functionality, we've got a lot of ability to monitor, do real-time and historical monitoring of our traffic. So this gives us monitoring over different time scales, and it logs all of the headers that go through by default. We can change the logging levels to do other things, or to log differently for different parts of the site, but straight away we've got all this logging available to us, which is great for diagnosing problems, checking if things are up or down, gathering metrics, and all this is made available to the analytics part of the gateway component. And this is with pretty much the simplest gateway configuration you can have. So now let's try something a bit more interesting. The next thing to do is to add Geo-IP filtering to the SOAP service that's part of our web application. Specifically, we want to whitelist which countries are allowed to make calls on the SOAP service. Since Geo-IP filtering isn't part of the core product, the core gateway product, we've written a couple of, well, a plugin which contains a couple of filters. The core bit of the source code that implements the filter is this, and just to test this, this is essentially a stub to a Geo-IP framework, but to test it we're just saying if the client address is localhost, then call it New Zealand, otherwise call it Australia, and then it just puts that two-letter country code into an attribute of the message. That's one filter. The other filter is one that just extracts that and then just checks that the country code that's been put into the message is one of the ones that's whitelisted in the filter configuration. So to make this work, first of all we compile the plugin, which I've done, and then I've just got an AND script here which pushes it up to the jar up to the host. Then we need to import. We need to tell Policy Studio about the jar. Okay, and then as per the instruction, we need to restart Policy Studio with the dash clean option. And we'll also have to restart the gateway itself. Once that's done, we import the plugin metadata. Right, and what this has done is it's made, if we look into our policy that we created a moment ago, it's given us a couple of new filters, a set geodata and a test geodata. So we now need to create a new policy that implements those filters and associate that policy with the SOAP service. We go over to our the SOAP service is here, /SOAP, and we can see it's accessible from outside of the host. To test that it's working, we need to see that it's accessible from localhost. Now, to do that, I've just set up Firefox on the same host, and you can see that it's the SOAP service is accessible through the external interface. If we look at it through localhost, we can see that it's accessible through there as well at the moment. And what we'll be testing is that when we've implemented the filter, that we can distinguish between these two, and that it'll be accessible from one but not the other. So to make the new policy, we'll just start off by copying the one we made before. issue here about whether we name our policies after the job that they do or after the part of the site that they protect, but that's probably a conversation for another day. Now the extra filters we need. Set the country into the message and then test the country. We'll let through anything that we consider to be in Australia. And now we rewire this back up. So what this does now is it looks up the country code from the client IP address and sets that into the qubit.geo-IP.country code message attribute, and this one tests the qubit.geo-IP.country code against the whitelist, which was at the moment we've just set to Australia, and if that succeeds it goes ahead with the connection. What do we do if it fails? Well, we'll do a couple of things. We'll set the status code of the response to 404. And put a little bit of text with that. Put that in the failure path. Okay. Now we associate that with the path. And the relative path is policy is that one. And then we can deploy that. Okay. Now from here we can see we can still access the SOAP service. And going back into here, we can still access the SOAP service, but from here we'll get 404. And if we were to reverse that, so now we say test the data, change that to NZ, deploy that. See that now will be the other way around, and that one now fails, as will this one when we access it externally, but our web application still works. So that's a pretty simple operation. There's extension points to this. The reason I built the plugin as two different components, the set geodata and the test geodata, is you might want to do things like take the country code and put it into a header field, which we can do pretty easily. We can say Right, so now it passes that country code on to the web application as an HTTP header, which we can see if we deploy that and go back to the one that's working, and we reload that. Go back to our logging. That's actually a useful use case because we're doing this in the DMZ. It's much more likely that we'll be able to determine the client IP address reliably before it's passed through any other reverse proxies. And there's our message, and this is telling us that when it made the request through to the web application, it inserted the country code. Alright, that's a very simple test. I'm going to go now and finish coding my Geo-IP filter to use an actual Geo-IP library. Thank you for listening. Bye.